He had a tattoo on his right arm. A stick figure, arms spread wide, feet off the ground, like a person hovering between worlds. It was the logo from a Pearl Jam single called Alive. A song about someone who survives when they weren't supposed to. A song about carrying something inside you that you didn't ask to carry. A song whose whole question is, what does it mean to still be here? Brian Shaffer loved that song enough to put it on his body permanently. He was that kind of fan. The kind where the music wasn't background, it was identity. It was the truest version of who he was when the rest of life wasn't looking. That tattoo was on his arm on the night of March 31st, 2006, when he rode an escalator up into a bar in Columbus, Ohio. And it was on his arm at 1:55 in the morning, when a security camera caught the last confirmed image of him that exists anywhere on Earth. And then, Brian Shaffer was gone. The building had cameras watching every exit. Police reviewed every frame. They brought dogs. They went into the sewers. They interviewed over 100 people. They searched rivers. They chased leads to Michigan, Texas, and Sweden. And 20 years later, 20 years, not a single person on this planet can tell you with certainty what happened to him. A 27-year-old man walked into a bar, and the cameras never showed him walking out. That's what we're doing today, and I promise you, by the end of this, you will have more questions than when we started, because that's the nature of this case. Every answer leads to a darker door. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to Brian. Brian Randall Shaffer was born on February 11th, 1979, in Pickerington, Ohio, quiet suburb east of Columbus. The kind of town where you recognize your neighbors at the grocery store, and the high school football game is genuinely the biggest event of the week. He was the firstborn son of Randy and Renee Shaffer, older brother to Derek. I want to tell you something specific about Brian, because he was a great guy, everyone loved him, is a sentence I could write about literally anyone, and it would mean nothing. So instead, let me tell you this. At some point during his time at Ohio State, Brian was at a party. There was a girl there, not someone he knew, someone who didn't know many people that night. And she was sitting by herself in the corner of the room while everyone else was doing what people do at parties. Brian noticed. He walked over. He spent the better part of an hour just talking with her. Not hitting on her. Just talking. Asking about her life, her plans, what she thought was funny. By the end of the night, she was laughing harder than anyone else in the room. That's who Brian Shaffer was. He noticed the people other people didn't notice, and he made them feel like the most interesting person in the room. His friends described him as magnetic without being arrogant, smart without being cold, the kind of guy who made a room feel easier just by being in it. He did 6 years at Ohio State to get his microbiology degree. 6 years, not because he was struggling, but because Brian did things on his own terms. He was thorough, he was deliberate, and in 2004, he was accepted into the Ohio State University College of Medicine. Medical school. He was going to be a doctor. But here's the thing I find genuinely fascinating about Brian Shaffer, and this is something I want you to hold on to, because we're coming back to it. The man the world was watching become a doctor, and the man Brian actually was when nobody was keeping score were two very different people. In private, after a couple of drinks, with the people he trusted, Brian talked about leaving, about moving somewhere tropical, starting a band, playing music in the style of Jimmy Buffett on a beach somewhere warm and far from landlocked Ohio. He was obsessed with Pearl Jam at a level that went beyond fandom. He knew every B-side, every live recording, every version of every song from every tour. He had the stick figure from Alive permanently on his right arm. And he talked about that dream, the band, the beach, the slower life. The way people talk about the thing they do if they could just hit pause on the life they're actually living. I don't think that dream made him unhappy, but I think it made him complicated. And complicated matters in this case. During medical school, Brian fell in love. Her name was Alexis Wagoner, also a medical student. They'd been together long enough that by early 2006, everyone around them, his dad, his brother, their mutual friends, could quietly see a proposal coming. Brian had already planned it. Spring break, Miami, the two of them. He was going to get down on one knee somewhere warm with the ocean behind him. He had the ring. He had the trip booked. He had the moment planned. And then the worst thing happened. 3 weeks before spring break, Brian's mother died. Myelodysplasia. It's a disease of the bone marrow. The marrow stops producing healthy blood cells properly, red cells, white cells, platelets, and without those, your body begins to fail in systematic, irreversible ways. It's not a fast disease, and it's not a quiet one. It is a slow, grinding process of loss that people who love medicine understand in the most clinical and therefore the most brutal possible way. Brian was a second-year medical student. He knew exactly what that disease was doing to his mother. He understood it at a cellular level. He could name what was happening inside her body and in what order it would happen next. And there was nothing that knowledge could do for either of them except make the helplessness sharper. Brian Shaffer died in March of 2006, 3 weeks before spring break, 3 weeks before Miami. His friends told police he seemed like he was handling it. Outwardly, he kept going to class. He kept making plans. Life was going to continue, because that's what you say when someone asks how you're doing after you've lost your mother. But grief is never what it looks like on the outside. It lives somewhere deeper, somewhere you can only access at 2 in the morning when everything else goes quiet. And Brian had been awake at 2 in the morning a lot. He'd been pulling all-nighters to get through his exams, cramming for the most demanding year in the entire medical school curriculum, while also dealing with the fact that his mother was gone. His father, Randy, noticed. He told people later that Brian seemed exhausted in the days leading up to spring break, depleted in a way that went beyond tired. When Brian called Randy on the evening of March 31st to say he was going out with a friend, just a Friday night, just a drink or two, spring break was starting, Randy had that quiet parental feeling, the one you can't quite put into words, that his son probably needed to just sleep. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to be that dad, the one who clips his 27-year-old son's wings on a Friday night. Randy Shaffer would spend the rest of his life thinking about that moment. March 31st, 2006. Friday, the last day of the academic quarter at Ohio State. Brian's original plan was to spend the evening with his brother Derek and Derek's wife. Those plans fell through at the last minute. So Brian made a call. His old friend and former roommate, a guy named William Florence, who went by Clint. I need you to remember that name. Clint Florence. We are going to spend a long time on him later, and nothing I'm about to tell you about that night will make sense unless you know that name is coming. They agreed to meet at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, second floor of the South Campus Gateway building on North High Street, right at the edge of the Ohio State campus. You take an escalator from the ground floor to reach it. It's not a dive bar. It's an upscale-ish spot in a large entertainment complex. Live music, crowds of people, the kind of place that's absolutely packed on the last Friday before spring break. Around 9 p.m., they're inside. About an hour later, Brian steps away to make a phone call. He finds somewhere quieter, or as quiet as you can get in a packed bar, and he dials Alexis. She's in Toledo, back home at her parents' place for spring break before their Miami trip. She picks up. He tells her he loves her. She tells him she loves him. They talk for a few minutes. Nothing heavy, nothing significant, just the kind of call you make on a Friday night when you're thinking about the person you're about to ask to marry you. A perfectly ordinary call. The kind where you hang up and think nothing of it because there will be 1,000 more calls just like it. Alexis would replay that conversation in her head for the rest of the year, looking for something in it, something she might have missed. There was nothing there. It was just a phone call. It was just "I love you." That's all it was. After the call, Brian and Clint go bar hopping. They work south down High Street toward the Arena District, stopping at multiple bars. At each one, Clint would later tell police they each had one shot. Just one, pacing themselves. Shortly after midnight, they run into a woman named Meredith Reed in the Short North neighborhood, a friend of Clint's. She offers them a ride back up to the Ugly Tuna where a live band is playing the last set of the night. The three of them go back. 1:15 a.m. Security cameras at the Gateway building catch 3 people on the escalator. Brian Shaffer, Clint Florence, Meredith Reed. Brian is in the middle of the frame. He's relaxed, a little loose from the drinks, but completely fine. He's talking or laughing. The footage is grainy and old, so you can't be precise, but nothing about that image looks like a man who is 40 minutes from vanishing. They go inside. The bar is absolutely packed. Last Friday before spring break. The band is playing. People are pressed 3 deep at the bar, yelling over the music. It is exactly the chaos of exactly that kind of night. And at some point inside that chaos, Brian drifts away from Clint and Meredith. Some accounts say he told them he wanted to go talk to someone from the band. Others say he just drifted. Nobody thought much of it. In a packed bar on a Friday night, you lose people and you find them again. It's not a thing you track. It's just how it goes. Except this time, it wasn't how it went. 1:55 a.m. A security camera outside the bar's main entrance catches Brian Shaffer one last time. He's in the hallway just past the front door, the area near the top of the escalator. And he's talking to 2 women. Their names were Brighton Zacco and Amber Ruick. He'd apparently met them at some point inside the bar during the night. The conversation looks easy, casual. Brian is gesturing. The women are laughing. Nothing urgent, nothing wrong, just the end of a Friday night. They talk for a few minutes. Then Brian turns. He walks back toward the bar entrance. He moves out of the frame. That's it. That is the last confirmed image of Brian Randall Shaffer on any camera anywhere in the world. He was 27 years old. He was wearing dark clothes. He had a Pearl Jam tattoo on his right arm. He was walking back into a bar, and he was never seen again. 2 a.m. Last call. Lights up. The band stops mid-set, and the crowd begins moving toward the escalators. Clint and Meredith filter out with everyone else. They look around inside first. Can't find Brian. They go downstairs and wait out on the street, expecting him to come down the escalator any second. He doesn't come. They call his phone, leave a voicemail, wait a little longer, assume he slipped out ahead of them and went home. It happens, it's late, people disappear into the night at closing time. They go home separately. Saturday passes. Maybe his phone is dead. Maybe he's sleeping. Sunday, still nothing. Monday morning, Brian Shaffer does not show up at Port Columbus International Airport for his flight to Miami. The flight he booked months ago. The trip where Alexis was almost certainly getting a ring. He didn't show. Alexis reported him missing. Randy reported him missing. And Columbus police opened what would become, over the next 20 years, one of the most exhaustively investigated and ultimately unanswerable missing persons cases in modern American history. Police start at the last known location, the Ugly Tuna, and specifically, the cameras. The Gateway complex had security cameras watching the main entrance, the escalators, and the key exit points of the building. It was a well-monitored building, more than most bars, because the surrounding neighborhood had enough incidents that the management had invested in coverage. Police pulled every hour of footage from the night of March 31st through the early morning of April 1st and reviewed it frame by frame. Here is everything they confirmed. Brian, Clint, and Meredith riding the escalator up at 1:15 a.m. Brian standing outside the bar entrance at 1:55 a.m. talking to 2 women. Brian turning and walking back toward the entrance at approximately 1:57 a.m. Clint and Meredith coming back down the escalator at closing time and leaving the building. Here is what they did not find. Brian leaving. Through any door. On any camera. At any time. Not once. Sergeant John Hurst, one of the lead investigators, said publicly that in his entire career, he had never encountered anything like that footage. Almost every person who entered that building on that night could be accounted for leaving. Almost every person. So what are the exits? The obvious one is the escalator, the same one they all rode up, covered by cameras. Brian is not on them going back down. Then there's a second exit that becomes central to this case. A service door not far from where Brian was last seen on camera, leading to a first-floor hallway. At the time of Brian's disappearance, that hallway connected to an active construction zone, and the construction zone had its own exterior exit to the street. The cameras covering that area were not ideal. One was on a constant rotation, sweeping back and forth in a loop. The other was manually operated, which means there were small windows of time where a person moving through that area might have slipped past without being captured. Might. That word is doing a lot of work in this case. Columbus police also pulled footage from 3 bars on the same strip of North High Street. If Brian had exited through the service door, navigated the construction zone, and made it to the street, he would almost certainly have appeared on one of those cameras. He doesn't appear on any of them. Police dogs swept the area. Officers checked every dumpster, every alley, canvassed every building nearby. They went into the sewer system beneath Columbus, the actual sewers, underground, and found nothing. Brian's apartment on King Avenue, 6 blocks away, was exactly as he'd left it. Car in its spot, passport on his desk, wallet there, nothing taken, nothing disturbed. Over 100 people were interviewed. For full boxes of evidence files were assembled, and at the end of all of it, the investigation had produced something that had almost never been produced before in a case like this. A genuine mystery. A man who entered a building and, as far as any camera was concerned, never left it. Standard procedure when a person goes missing. You polygraph everyone who was with them in the hours before they vanished. Not because polygraphs are definitive. They're not. They're not admissible in court for a reason. Plenty of innocent people don't trust them and choose not to take them, but because it's a baseline. It tells investigators who's being open and who isn't. Brian's father, Randy, agreed to a polygraph. Passed. Meredith Reed agreed. Passed. Every other person with relevant contact that night agreed. Passed. William Clint Florence refused. Not once. He refused at least twice. Once when Columbus police asked him shortly after Brian disappeared, and again, years later, when a private investigator named Don Corbett, who was working the case for free on behalf of the Shaffer family, made the same request. Now, I want to be completely clear about what I am and am not saying here. Refusing a polygraph is a legal right. Full stop. It does not make you guilty of anything. There are smart, innocent people who refuse polygraphs every day because they don't trust the process or their lawyer told them not to. That's legitimate. But here's the context that you cannot separate from that decision. Everyone else cooperated. Every single other person who was part of that night said yes. Clint Florence was the only one who said no. And then, at some point after the investigation intensified, he retained an attorney, Neil Rosenberg. And after that, Clint Florence essentially went silent. No more contact with the Shaffer family. No more updates. No more conversations. Brian's brother Derek noticed it immediately. He told reporters, as soon as the detective started getting involved, that's when he pretty much had no contact with anybody. I've always thought he definitely knows something, just won't come forward with it. Alexis said the same thing. She believed Florence was withholding something, though she was clear that she didn't think Brian ran away. I don't think he's alive, she said. I can't imagine he would have just done that. When Florence was briefly reachable by journalists, here is the statement he gave. I want you to read it carefully. While I appreciate any effort in trying to determine what happened to Brian that night, I must decline your request. Any and all questions you have for me should be directed to my attorney, Neil Rosenberg. 3 things. The capital letters on any and all. That's not casual phrasing. That's someone who is firmly, pointedly done with the conversation. The word appreciate, placed at the front of a statement by a man who is about to give you exactly nothing. And third, he typed Brain, not Brian. Brain, his missing friend's name, in the one statement he ever made about the case. Maybe it's a typo. Probably it's a typo. But of all the words you would triple check in a statement about your missing friend, his name is the one. Then Rosenberg himself, Florence's own attorney, sends a letter to private investigator Don Corbett in September 2008. And here is what that letter says. If Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe after speaking with the detective involved, then it is Brian, and not Clint, who is causing his family pain and hardship. Brian should come forward and end this. I want to sit with that for a moment. The lawyer for the one man who refused a polygraph is now telling a private investigator, based on conversations with a Columbus detective, that Brian is alive and hiding. And then he goes one step further. He says, my client is not responsible for the Shaffer family's pain. Brian is. Is that genuine intelligence from law enforcement? Is it legal strategy designed to redirect suspicion? Is it calculated misdirection from a man whose job is to protect his client? Here's where I land, honestly. I'm not accusing Clint Florence of anything. I want to be clear about that. What I am saying is this. His behavior, specifically his behavior, and only his behavior, has been documented publicly by multiple investigators, by the victim's own family, and by journalists who covered this case for 20 years. And that behavior, taken together, is the kind that does not sit easily. The polygraph refusals, the lawyer, the silence, the statement with the capital letters, the attorney's letter placing blame on the missing man. Make of that what you will. I've made something of it. I think you will too. For 5 months after Brian disappeared, Alexis Wagoner called his phone every single night before she went to sleep. Every night. The same ritual. She'd dial the number. It would go to voicemail. She'd wait for the greeting to play. His voice, recorded on some ordinary day before any of this happened, not knowing it would become the last recording of him that anyone who loved him could reach. And then she'd hang up. And she'd try to sleep. Think about what that is. Think about choosing to hear a dead phone every night because the alternative is a silence that's even harder to sit inside. Alexis Wagoner called Brian's voicemail every night for 5 months because it was the closest thing she had left to him. And then one night in September 2006, 5 months after he vanished, something changed. She called, and the phone rang. Not voicemail, a ring. 3 rings, by her account. An actual live ring. The kind that only happens when a device is powered on somewhere and a cell tower is carrying the signal. She called back, rang again. She kept calling. She wrote later on her MySpace page at the time, just to hear it. I kept calling it to hear it purely because it was one of the best sounds I have ever heard, even if no one picked up. When investigators looked into this, Singular, Brian's carrier, suggested it may have been a network glitch, a phantom ring. It happens. Servers do strange things. And maybe that's all it was. But then investigators found the ping. Brian's phone had generated a detectable signal at a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio. Hilliard is a suburb. It sits approximately 14 miles northwest of Columbus. It is not near the Gateway building. It is not near Brian's apartment on King Avenue. It is not near anywhere that Brian was known to spend time. It is 14 miles away from the last place he was seen, in a direction that has never been explained by anything or anyone connected to this case. And the phone was silent. For 5 months. Not a single signal. Not a single ping. And then, September 2006, it wakes up in Hilliard. Let that land. Someone had that phone. Or the phone was somewhere, discarded, hidden, held. And for one brief window in September 2006, it powered on and hit a tower 14 miles northwest of where Brian disappeared. Whether Brian powered it on, or whether someone else did, that phone was in Hilliard. The lead went nowhere definitive. No physical phone was ever recovered. No explanation was ever confirmed. The signal appeared, and then it was gone. But I want you to think about the 2 possibilities. If Brian is alive and ran, why Hilliard? Why would you power on the phone that everyone is looking for, 14 miles away from where you vanished, 5 months after you disappeared? That's not the behavior of someone who carefully planned an exit. And if someone else had the phone, who? Why did they have it? Why did they turn it on there? What was in Hilliard in September 2006 that connects to any of this? Nobody has ever publicly answered those questions. Not the police. Not the family. Not anyone who has investigated this case. The phone rang in Hilliard, Ohio, and then it went quiet forever. Randy Shaffer was not capable of sitting still while his son was missing. He'd already lost his wife. The idea of losing Brian, of simply waiting in a house for news that never came, was not something Randy could do. So he didn't. He hired private investigators. He drove across Ohio chasing leads. He reached out to every organization and resource he could find. He even consulted a psychic. And I want to be careful about how I say this, because it would be easy to dismiss it, and I don't think that's fair. When you are a father who has buried his wife and cannot find his son, and the police have no answers, you follow every thread. You follow all of them. The psychic told Randy that Brian's body was in water near a bridge pier. So Randy Shaffer, a grieving father in his 60s, bought a set of waders. He put them on, and with his son Derek and a small group of community volunteers, he walked the banks of the Olentangy River, which runs through Columbus alongside the university campus, searching near every bridge he could reach. Think about that image. A father in waders, in a river, looking for his son under bridges. That is what grief looks like when it refuses to become passivity. They found nothing, but Randy kept going. He went to the Ohio State Legislature and advocated for a standardized protocol for missing persons investigations, because he discovered that when Brian disappeared, individual police departments could handle such cases however they saw fit. No consistent framework, no uniform process. Randy pushed for a bill that would change that. By the time he died, that bill was law. His son's disappearance made Ohio better for every other family that would one day need the same help. That's the kind of man Randy Shaffer was. In the summer of 2006, Pearl Jam was on tour, and at a concert in Cincinnati, lead singer Eddie Vedder stopped the show. He stopped the show. He looked out at thousands of people, fans who had paid for a Pearl Jam concert and were absolutely not expecting this, and he asked for their help. He said a 27-year-old student named Brian Shaffer was missing in Ohio. He said if anyone knew anything, he wanted them to come forward. And I need you to understand why that moment is so much bigger than it sounds on the surface. Brian had the logo from Pearl Jam's single Alive tattooed permanently on his right arm. Alive, a song about someone who survives what should have destroyed them, who carries inside them something they can't escape, who is still here against all reasonable expectation. It was the truest piece of music Brian Shaffer ever connected with deeply enough to put on his skin. And now the lead singer of Pearl Jam was stopping a concert in Ohio, asking the world to help find him. The man with Alive on his arm. The band that wrote Alive asking the world where he was. Eddie Vedder had access to a microphone and an audience of thousands, and he used both for Brian Shaffer. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of thing that should have cracked the case open. The tips from that concert went nowhere definitive. Everyone was investigated. Everyone dissolved. But the moment itself is something I can't shake. Because somewhere in the universe of things that should have been enough to find someone, that was one of them. It wasn't. September 2008. A windstorm swept through Ohio. Randy Shaffer was in his yard in Baltimore, Ohio, clearing debris. A branch came down from a nearby tree and struck him. His neighbors found his body the next day. Randy Shaffer had spent 2 years of his life looking for his son. He had lost his wife. He had lost his son. And then a branch fell during a storm, and he was gone too. He never got his answer. In the days that followed, an online condolence book was posted so people could leave messages for the family. Genuine messages came in. People who had followed Brian's case. People who knew the family. People who simply wanted to offer something. And then, among those messages, one appeared. To Dad, love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands. The Shaffer family went still. Investigators jumped on it. Could this be real? Could Brian actually be alive, somewhere in the Caribbean? And was this his way of saying goodbye to his father? It was a hoax. Investigators traced the post to a public access computer in Franklin County, Ohio. Somewhere in Columbus, a person had sat down, found a grieving family's condolence book posted in the days after their father's death, and typed a fake message from the dead man's missing son. Nobody was ever charged. No explanation was ever given. The person who did this has never, as far as anyone knows publicly, faced any consequence for it. I don't have adequate language for that. I really don't. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This was a deliberate act of cruelty aimed at a family that had already lost a mother, a son, and now a father. And someone looked at all of that and decided to make it worse. What kind of person does that? I've thought about it, and I don't have a satisfying answer. Columbus police have said publicly that they have 3 working theories about what happened to Brian Shaffer. They have never said what those 3 theories are. But the evidence, and 20 years of investigation, has produced a fairly clear picture of the possibilities. I'm going to lay all 3 out. And at the end, I'm going to tell you where I actually land. Because I think you deserve more than just a list. The accident theory. Brian, for reasons unknown, slips away from the bar through the service exit door. He navigates the dark, cluttered construction zone. He makes it out to the street, or maybe he doesn't make it that far. He's been drinking for several hours. The construction area is genuinely difficult to navigate sober. Maybe he falls. Maybe something happens in the dark between the bar and the street. Maybe he ends up in the Olentangy River. This is the theory that most investigators who have spoken on record seem to find most plausible. It's mechanically clean. It explains the camera gap. It explains the lack of planned exit. It explains why nobody has ever found any evidence of him living somewhere else. But here's the problem. The Olentangy River and its surroundings have been searched extensively, multiple times, and no body has ever surfaced. After 20 years, if Brian is in that river, there should be something. There isn't. And then there's the version of this theory that lives in the darker corners of this case. The construction zone that Brian may have passed through, it was eventually sealed, finished, concrete poured over it. Some people have wondered, in the way you wonder things you can't prove and probably shouldn't say out loud, whether something that happened in that construction zone might have been buried when the building work was completed. There is no evidence for this. I want to be absolutely clear about that. But I also can't tell you it's never been thought by people closer to this investigation than I am. The voluntary disappearance theory. This is the one that cuts deepest for the people who loved Brian. Because if it's true, it means Brian chose to leave everything behind. His family, his girlfriend, the life he'd built. The argument for it goes like this. Brian was at a crossroads. His mother had just died. He was exhausted and depleted from medical school. He was about to make one of the biggest commitments of his life. And underneath all of it was this private yearning to escape. Tropical places, music, a life that looked nothing like a doctor's office in Ohio. He had apparently, in the weeks before he disappeared, asked Alexis whether she'd ever consider just starting fresh somewhere new. Not just Miami for spring break. Somewhere new, permanently. One retired Columbus homicide detective, Jay Fulton, told A&E that he believed Brian probably went off the grid voluntarily. His reasoning, unless you're tied up with organized crime, bodies don't disappear. And if Brian chose to walk out through that service exit, if he had a plan, if he'd arranged something, if he knew which cameras to avoid, then the footage gap makes perfect sense. You don't appear on cameras when you deliberately choose the door without one. But here's where that theory falls apart for me, personally. Brian's passport was in his apartment. His car was in its spot. There were no large cash withdrawals, no arrangements anyone has ever been able to trace, no evidence of a second identity being built. And Alexis, the woman who shared his life and knew what he was inside, said plainly, "I can't imagine he would have just done that." She didn't believe it. And there's something about her certainty that I find more persuasive than a detective's theory built on the absence of a body. But I also can't fully rule it out. And neither can anyone else. The third theory, the one nobody names. This is the one investigators talk about least publicly. And I think the reason they don't talk about it publicly is because naming a suspect without enough evidence to charge them is legally and professionally treacherous ground. But it is there. It sits at the center of this case whether anyone says it out loud or not. Was Brian Shaffer harmed, deliberately, by someone? A missing persons advocate named Kelly Koshiner, who runs the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive social media pages and has investigated this case for years, received a tip that named a specific individual connected to the events of that night. When Koshiner brought this name to Columbus police, the detective she spoke to was visibly startled that she even knew it. The individual had been on Columbus PD's radar since 2006. There was a prior investigation. And then Koshiner says something that I think deserves to sit on its own. Columbus police had apparently dug up the basement of a house near Lane Avenue, close to where Brian was last seen, in connection with this unnamed individual. Let that land. Police dug up a basement, near where Brian disappeared, connected to a specific person. There is no public follow-up to this that I have been able to find. No charges, no named suspect, no official confirmation of what, if anything, was found. But the shape of it, an unnamed person of interest on the police radar since the first week of the investigation, connected to a physical search of a property, tells you that at least some people inside this investigation have never believed this was simply a man who wandered into a construction zone and had an accident. Something happened. Someone may know what. And now here's where I land after everything I've read and everything I know about this case. I don't believe Brian ran away. The absence of any preparation, no money, no passport, no trace of planning. Combined with Alexis's certainty and the profile of the man everyone knew him to be doesn't add up to a voluntary exit to me. The accident theory is plausible, but after 20 years with no body and no trace, I find it harder to hold on to than I once might have. The third theory, foul play, a specific person, a basement that got dug up, is the one I come back to. Not because I have evidence that rises to any legal standard, but because the pattern of what was investigated and what was never publicly explained points somewhere that the accident theory doesn't reach. I think someone knows what happened to Brian Shaffer. I think that person has known for 20 years. And I think they've been living with that knowledge every single day since April 1st, 2006. In March 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released an age-progressed photograph of Brian Shaffer. Software, the same kind used by law enforcement agencies across the country to help identify people who have been missing for years, took the face from that 2006 security camera footage and pushed it forward 15 years. Added the weight that middle age puts around the jaw, the lines that appear at the corners of eyes, the way a face settles into itself. I want you to look at that image, if you can find it, for a moment. You can still see him in it. The same jaw, the same brow, the same person who stood on that escalator at 1:15 in the morning on a Friday night in spring, talking or laughing, with a Pearl Jam tattoo on his right arm and a trip to Miami 3 days away. The Bureau put that image out so that someone, anywhere, anyone, who might have crossed paths with Brian in the years since 2006 might recognize him. Might make a call, might say, I think I've seen that person. No confirmed identification has ever been reported. In 2020, before the age-progressed photo, the case was assigned to a new detective. The FBI was brought in to run facial recognition analysis on a photograph circulating online. Someone thought a homeless man photographed in Tijuana, Mexico, might be Brian. The FBI analysis ruled it out. As of 2026, Columbus police confirm the case is still open, still active. Tips still come in, at least 2 per month through Crime Stoppers, by the last public accounting. For boxes of evidence files sit in a storage room somewhere in Columbus, waiting. Retired FBI agent Harry Trombitas said something in early 2026 that I keep coming back to. He said, anybody that remembers the I-270 case, we had over 5,700 tips, and it was tip number 5,444 that led to the resolution of the case. Tip number 5,444. That's how some of these cases get solved. Not with the first 100 calls, not with the first 1,000, with the one that comes from someone who's been sitting on a piece of information for years, waiting for the moment when the circumstances of their life finally changed enough to let them talk. That call hasn't come yet for Brian Shaffer, but it might. It still might. I want to come back to Brian one more time before we close this. Because I think the thing that happens to people who go missing, especially people whose cases stay unsolved for decades, is that the mystery eventually swallows the person. Brian Shaffer becomes the security camera footage. He becomes the escalator. He becomes the bar that has no exit. He becomes a puzzle. And he wasn't a puzzle. He was a person. He had dinner with his father at an Outback Steakhouse on the last evening of his life. And it was just dinner, just a Tuesday kind of evening between a father and a son, and neither of them knew it was the last one. He called his girlfriend at 10 p.m. to tell her he loved her. She picked up on the second or third ring. They talked for a few minutes. He hung up and went back into the bar, and that was the last time she ever heard his voice, but she didn't know that yet. She just said goodnight and thought about Miami and the ring she was fairly sure was coming. He had a live on his arm. He had a dream about a beach somewhere warm. He had a laugh that made the people around him feel like the room was better than it was a minute ago. He was 27 years old. His mother is gone. His father is gone. What's left is his brother Derek, who put out a statement 20 years after Brian disappeared that said this. Every day we think about Brian and can't believe it's been 20 years. We still continue to hope and pray to have answers someday and wish that anyone who knows anything would come forward. Hope and pray, not know, not expect. After 20 years, after everything that family has been through, a mother gone, a son gone, a father struck down by a branch in a storm, the word Derek reaches for is still hope. That's what unsolved means when you strip away the theories and the camera footage and the polygraph refusals. It means a brother who gets up every morning 20 years later and carries something that has no resolution. It means the absence of an ending that should have come a long time ago. And it means that somewhere, in Ohio or somewhere else, in a comfortable life or a difficult one, there is a person who knows what happened on the second floor of the Gateway building on the night of March 31st, 2006. A person who has gotten up every morning for 20 years and carried it too. And who has, every single day, chosen not to say. Brian Shaffer deserves better than that. So does Derek. So that's where it ends. Or rather, that's where it doesn't end. Because cases like this don't end. They just go quiet. They wait. A man with a live on his arm walked into a bar on a Friday night. The cameras saw him go in. They never saw him come out. 20 years later, nobody knows. I want to know what you think. Seriously, not just as a comment section thing, but genuinely. This case has 3 realistic theories, and I've told you where I land. Where do you land? Drop it below because I read these, and this is the kind of case where I want to hear from you. If this is your first video with me, subscribe. We do cases like this every week. Complex, unresolved, the kind that stay with you. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.